Hey there, angry faithful. I just wanted to drop in, bend your ear a little bit, get your attention. So if you're not listening, drop what you're doing and pay attention to me because I'm here to inform you that not only can you get your daily, maybe if you're binging it, I'm not sure, that's entirely up to you, but you can multiply your doses of angry me fuckery by paying attention to all of the platforms upon which you can find either the dulcet tones of my voice and David's voice or my pretty face and David's not so pretty face. Anyways, digressing, we not only we are on YouTube, we are on Spotify, we're on Rumble, we're on Google, Apple Podcast. We have a TikTok page. We're on Twitter, Instagram, and of course Facebook. So if you find yourself fuckery deprived, curl up with a nice hot mug of shut the fuck up and just listen. Open those ear holes and be prepared to be cream pied like it's the first time. Thanks for listening.
Welcome, Angry Faithful. Today on Psychos and Sociopaths, we're going to go over Babyface Nelson. Now, he had like 3 other different names. His actual name was Lester Joseph Gills, and he was also known as George Nelson, or which we go by Babyface Nelson. He was a bank robber back in the 30s. He actually was, I guess he's criminal partner with John Dillinger too. But his actual nickname, which derives from Gil being a short man with a youthful appearance, however, in a professional realm, Gil's fellow criminal dressed him as Jimmy, a violent bank robber. Lester Joseph Gill killed more agents of the FBI than any other criminal until he was dead. But here we go. Nelson was born Lester Joseph Gilson, December 6, 1908, in Chicago, Illinois, which, if anybody knows anything about Chicago, it's gangster territory.
Well, Chicago.
Chicago. I think I'm gonna say that each and every time. What are you? Where are you from? Chicago.
I'm from Chicago.
You kind of, it's Chicago. You kind of make a little bit, but if you say Chicago, you're basically just shooting Chicago out of your mouth like a bullet. So kind of like that.
I mean, you're lending credence to a heavy portion of Chicago's population, which happens to be Polish.
This is
coincidentally true. They all happen to be Bears fans.
This is true.
They like to wear the sweater vests.
I love this.
And eat the sausages.
I love that.
That's sorry.
That skit, like,
okay,
it is legendary.
So just to kind of quantify the reason why I'm eating Cheetos right now, I dozed off. I was watching Firefly, for like the 100th time, and I dozed off. The only reason I woke up is because at my tender young age of 45, I woke up with acid reflux. I happened to look.
Yeah, that happened.
I'm like, fuck, so what do? Milk and a bag of crunchy Cheetos, not the puffy Cheetos. That's shit. If I wanted to eat cheesy puffs, I'd go buy a box or one of them barrels of cheesy puffs from Sam's, right?
Yeah.
Or Costco, whatever. Crunchy Cheetos. That's where it's at, boy. Anyway, digressing.
Okay.
Carry on.
It's not like we derail anytime soon. Might as well start it off.
Right. I mean, somebody might comment that there was something wrong with us
If we
we
didn't
went,
do that,
if we had an entire show that stayed on topic.
yeah. Even by myself, I get off topic. But like I said, Nelson was born Lester Joseph Gilson in Chicago in December 6th, 1908, just in case you didn't hear it the first time. He was actually arrested in July 4th, 1921 at the age of 12 after he accidentally shot a playmate in the jaw with a pistol that he had found. Jesus Christ. He started out with a fucking bang, technically. He was served over a year in a state reformatory, which basically would be juvenile hall nowadays. Nelson was arrested again for car theft and joyriding at the age of 13 and was sent to penal school for an additional 18 months and released April 11th, 1924. He joined a gang during his mid-teens and became its leader in 1928. He married Helen. I am going to butcher that name all to hell. Hold on, Stephen Hawking's.
Wawrizenak.
I couldn't hear.
Wawrizenak.
Yeah, okay. Wawrizenak. Anyways, God,
her name Wawrizenak makes you kind of wonder if at their ceremony the priest is standing there. Marriage. Marriage is what brings us here together today.
Great Princess Bride tie-in. By the time he met Walrus Knack, Nelson was working as a standard oil station in his neighborhood, which doubled as a headquarters for the group of young tire thieves known God damn it. Known congruently as strippers. That name is totally different nowadays. Even the strippers. Could you imagine being named the strippers as a gang nowadays? I wonder.
Well, okay, so they were stealing tires, right?
Yeah, I
That's
get
what
it.
they were. That's why they called them strippers, because they're stripping the tires from the cars.
I get that. I totally get that. But could you imagine doing that nowadays, though?
Well, see, in the 20s,
Could you imagine if the
female
gang
dancers were called flappers.
Yeah. Okay. But think about it this way. They would have to carry around that pole. And as soon as they get, they would have to like plant the pole, have somebody like street. Yes. I didn't see nipples, so we're good. But they would have to travel with this pole. And you're like, who are you? We're the stripper gang. Yeah, baby. Yeah. Okay. Back on the topic.
Which reminds me, I need to find. That's what I'm going to do.
Find a stripper pole?
I'm going to get a dowel rod out of my garage because we have a shelf on the elf.
Uh-huh.
Elf on the shelf.
Shelf and the elf. What? Damn it. I fucked it up.
Tonight, the elf is going to move from the garland that's on the banister on the staircase.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put this elf on a pole. I will send you a picture.
Oh, please. Please. Post it on our Facebook page. Hey, if you're actually listening to this and you're able to comment where we should put the elf on the shelf after we do the stripper elf. Okay. I don't know how I'm gonna get through this every time I have to say stripper. Nelson fell in an association with strippers. God damn, this does not right. This writes itself. and acquired himself with a number of local criminals, including one who employed him to drive a bootleg alcohol through Chicago suburbs. Nelson became associated with members of the sub-basement Turi gang?
The suburb-based Toohey gang.
Toohey gang. Okay.
Now, within 2 years, Nelson and the gang were involved in organized crime, especially armed robbery. And on January 6th of 1930, the associates forced entry into the home of magazine executive Charles M. Richter. Now, after trussing him up, I love that term, trussing him up. They were using the terminology of the era.
They probably got it off of a article.
Maybe. After trussing him up with adhesive tape and cutting the phone lines, basically they duct taped him.
Did they have duct
They
tape?
ransacked the house and made off with approximately $205,000 worth of jewelry. Now that's equivalent to almost $3.3 million in 2021 dollars.
That's probably about 15 million now because of inflation, but I'll go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, 2 months later, they carried out a similar robbery at a bungalow of Lottie Brenner von Below on Sheridan Road. This job netted approximately $50,000 worth of jewelry. After the crime, Chicago newspapers, see what I did there? Chicago newspapers nicknamed the group the Tate Bandits. Ooh, they're the Sticky Bandits.
Dude.
Right?
Our Sticky Bandits.
Now, on April 21st of 1930, Nelson robbed a bank for the first time, making off with approximately $4,000. Now, a month later, he and his gang netted $25,000 worth of jewelry from home invasions. On October 3rd, Nelson robbed the Itasca Bank, or State Bank, of $4,600. A teller later identified him as one of the robbers. 3 nights later, he stole the jewelry of the wife of Chicago Mayor Big Bill Thompson, valued at $18,000. Now, she described her attacker, saying he had a baby face. He was good looking, hardly more than a boy, had dark hair, and was wearing a gray top coat and a brown felt hat, turned down brim. Nelson and his crew were later linked to a botched roadhouse robbery in Summit, Illinois on November 23rd of 1930. In the ensuing gunfight, 3 people were killed and 3 wounded. 3 nights later, Nelson's gang robbed a tavern on Waukegan Road, and Nelson committed his first murder of note when he fatally shot stockbroker Edwin R. Thompson. Now, throughout the winter of 1931, most of the Tate Bandits were rounded up, including Nelson. The Chicago Tribune referred to their leader as George Babyface Nelson, who received a sentence of 1 year to life in the state penitentiary at Joliet. That's what it's pronounced, Joliet. Nelson escaped during a prison transfer in February 1932. Now, through his contacts with the Toohey gang, Nelson fled west to Reno, where he was harbored by William Graham, a known crime boss and gambler. Using the alias Jimmy Johnson, Nelson went on to Sausalito, California, where he worked for bootlegger Joe Pariente. Now, during his San Francisco Bay Area crime ventures, Nelson met John Paul Chase and Fatso Nagari, who later became close associates. Now, in Reno the next winter, Nelson first met the vacationing Alvin Karpis, who in turn introduced him to Midwest bank robber Eddie Bentz. Teaming up with the Bentz, Nelson returned to the Midwest the next summer. He committed a major bank robbery in Grand Haven, Michigan, on August 18th of 1933. In his first in the area. The robbery was not lucrative, though. Most of those involved made a full escape.
Now, okay, one question I'm reading all this and everything is the time he did the robberies. I'm surprised he didn't meet Al Capone at any point in time.
Well,
Because doing jobs
The
like
only reason he wouldn't have had, the only reason he wouldn't have made any kind of contact with Al Capone, assuming that he hadn't already, and it just hasn't been like noted here, but you know,
I'm curious.
he was sticking to the banks. He wasn't messing with any speakeasies. He wasn't raiding any, I mean, the only thing that he was doing as far as bootlegging work was out in California. Al Capone was mainly Chicago and in the Midwest.
Yeah,
But
I guess they never met. It's one of those things. It's just that whole thing to where
yeah, I mean, you just
you
assume that, they're Chicago. Some of they're going to be synonymous with
one
each
they're
other.
Chicago's, another they're criminals. You'd think they
Yeah,
would be at one point in time.
right.
Like
Well,
like
Grand Hayden. Go
like
ahead.
people going up, and God, I gotta get rid of that voice before I start doing the whole damn episode talking like I'm from Chicago. But anyways, like you ever work at somewhere that has a lot of people's like, hey, do you know this person because you work there? Yeah, you have associate like when you're in the army, it was like, hey, did you ever
Oh,
meet
hey, you were in the army. Did you know my brother? He was at
yeah.
Fort. What the fuck? And I'm like, no, no, I didn't.
Hell,
It's like,
I met a guy that was at my Air Force base at the time frame I was there. I'd never seen him. So it happens.
yeah, well, but the Grand Haven bank robbery convinced Nelson he was ready to lead his own gang through connections at the Green Lantern Tavern, which I'm sure it was a terrible, terrible bar. I mean, lazy writing, the whole 9 yards. See what it did there.
I see what you did there.
Okay.
Not even
Nelson
reading the source
recruited,
material.
huh?
Not even reading the source material. Fucking
Yeah.
assholes.
No, I mean they didn't. I mean, it's people like that. You want to travel back in time and just shoot the person that's going to eventually become the lead actor in that movie just to save the world from that horrible, horrible thing.
Yeah.
Anyways, Nelson recruited Homer Van Meter, Tommy Carroll, and Eddie Green. Now, with these men and two other local thieves, Nelson robbed the First National Bank of Brainerd, Minnesota of $32,000 on October 23rd, 1933, equivalent to approximately $670,000 in today's money. Now, witnesses reported that Nelson wildly sprayed submachine gun bullets at bystanders as he made his getaway. After collecting his wife Helen and his 4-year-old son Ronald, Nelson left with his crew for San Antonio, Texas. Now, while there, Nelson and his gang bought several weapons from underworld gunsmith Heyman Lehman. And one of those weapons was a 38 Super Colt pistol that had been modified so it was fully automatic. Nelson used this gun to kill Special Agent W. Carter Baum at Little Bohemia Lodge several months later. Now, on December 9th of 1933, a local woman tipped off San Antonio police regarding the presence of a nearby high-powered northern gangsters. 2 days later, Tommy Carroll was cornered by two detectives and opened fire, killing Detective H.C. Piran and wounding Detective Al Hartman. Now, all the Nelson gang, except Nelson, fled San Antonio. Nelson and his wife traveled west to the San Francisco Bay Area, where he recruited John Paul Chase and Fatso Nagari for a new wave of bank robberies the following spring. Now, he did have a partnership with John Dillinger. Now, on March 3rd, 1934, Dillinger made his famous wooden pistol escape from the jail in Crown Point, Indiana. Now, although the details remain in some dispute, the escape is suspected to have been arranged and financed by members of Nelson's newly formed gang, including Homer Van Meter, Tommy Carroll, Eddie Green, and John Red Hamilton, with the understanding that Dillinger would repay some of the part of the bribe money out of his share of the first robbery. Now, the night that Dillinger arrived in the Twin Cities, Nelson and his friend John Paul Chase were cut off by another car driven by local paint salesman Theodore Kidder. Nelson lost his temper and gave chase, crowding Kidder to the curb. Now, the salesman exited his vehicle to protest, whereupon Nelson shot him dead. 2 days after this, the new gang, with Hamilton's participation as the sixth man uncertain, struck the Security National Bank at Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Now, in the robbery, which netted around $49,000, that number is up for dispute. But Nelson severely wounded motorcycle policeman Hale Keith with a burst of submachine gun fire as the officer was arriving at the scene. Now, the six men were soon identified as the second Dillinger gang. Now, due to Dillinger's extreme notoriety. Now this was due to the extreme notoriety of Dillinger, but the gang had no official leader. Now, on March 13th, a week after the robbery in Sioux Falls, the gang robbed the First National Bank in Mason City, Iowa. And Dillinger and Hamilton were both shot and wounded in the robbery, where they made off with $52,000. And on April 3rd, federal agents ambushed and killed Eddie Green, though he was unarmed and they were uncertain of his identity. In the aftermath of the Mason City robbery, Nelson and John Paul Chase fled west to Reno, where their old boss Bill Graham and Jim McKay were fighting in a federal mail fraud case. Years later, the FBI determined that on March 22nd, 1934, Nelson and Chase abducted and killed the chief witness against the pair, Roy Fitritz. Fitritz's quartered body was said to have been thrown down an abandoned mine shaft, and he was never found.
On the afternoon of April 20th, Nelson, Dillinger, Van Miller, Carl, and Hamilton, and the Gaydon associated Aaron Run Pat Riley, accompanied by Nelson's wife Helen and the three girlfriends of the other man, arrived at this secluded low Bohemia lounge in Muskogee Waters, Wisconsin. Man, I am not able to talk today.
Manitowish Waters,
Wisconsin, for the weekend of rest. The gang connected to the resort apparently came from a previous dealings between Dillinger's attorney, Louis Piquet, and lodge owner Emily Watkins. Fuck Polish people. I hate them all now. Huh?
It's Emil Wanataka.
Okay. Though gang members greeted him by name, Wanataka maintained that he was unaware about the identities until sometime later that night. According to Brian Bros' book, Public Enemies, America's Greatest Crime Wave and the Birth of the FBI, 1933 and 1934, this most likely happened when Watanka was playing cards with Dillinger, Nelson, and Hampton. Messed that name several times. There we go. When Dillinger won a round and ranked in the pot, Wantika caught a glimpse of Dillinger's pistol concealed into his coat and noticed that Nelson and the others had shoulder holsters. By the way, I looked at that gun, the Super .38. It looks
super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like well, if you put one round in the chamber, it's regular 1911. Could you imagine going full auto with only fucking
full auto with a 45?
With no .38.
I know that it was a 38, but
yeah,
going full auto on a 1911. No.
but even still, just the basic fact of it would be that.
Yeah.
I mean, all right, everybody. The following day, while she was away from the lodge with her young son at the children's birthday party, when Tonka's wife informed a friend, Harry Voss, that Dillinger's gang was at the lodge, and the FBI was essentially given a tip early in April 22nd. Melvin Purvis and a number of agents arrived by plane from Chicago And the gains departure imminently, attacking the lodge quickly and with little preparation, without notification, obtaining help from the local authorities. Wantaka offered $1 dinner special on Sunday night, and the last of the crowd, estimated as 75 people, were leaving as the agents arrived in the front driveway. A 1933 Chevrolet Coupe was leaving at the moment with three departing lodge customers: John Hoffman, Eugene Bonesney, no, Stephen Hawking,
Boys know.
Boys know, and John Morris, who apparently did not hear the order to halt because the car radio drowned all the agents yelling at them to stop. The agents quickly opened fire on them and instantly killing them, wounding the others and alerting the gang members inside. Adding to the chaos at this moment, Pat Riley returned to the lodge after an out of town errand for then Meter. According to John Hamilton's girlfriend, Pat Currington, accused by the agents, Riley and Currington backed out and escaped under fire. Dillinger, Van Meter, Hamilton, and Carl escaped through the back of the lodge, which was unguarded, and made their way north on foot through the woods, passing a lake to commandeer a car and a driver at the resort mile away. Carl was not far behind them. He made it to Muskogee and stole a car and making it unevenful to St. Paul. Nelson, who had been outside of the lodge in a adjacent cabin, characteristically attacked the raiding party head on, exchanging fire with Purvis before retreating into the lodge under a return volley of other agents. From there, he slipped out the back and fled into the opposite direction from the others, emerging from the woods 90 minutes later, a mile away from Little Bohemia. Nelson kidnapped the lounge couple from their home and ordered them to drive him away. Apparently dissatisfied with the car's speed, quickly ordered them to pull up at a bright lit house where the switchboard operator Alvin Cooner, aware of the ongoing events, quickly phoned authorities at one of the involved lodges to report a suspicious vehicle in the front of his home. Shortly after Nelson had entered the home, taking the Cooners hostage, Elming Watika arrived with his brother-in-law, George Laporte, and a lodge employee, while a fourth man remained in the car and were also taken prisoner. Nelson ordered Cooner and Watika back into their vehicles, where the fourth man remained unnoticed in the back seat. As they prepared to leave, with Watinka driving at gunpoint, another car arrived with two federal agents, W. Carter Broom and J. Newman, as well as local constable Carl Christinen. Nelson asked the agents who they were, and upon the agents identifying themselves, Nelson quickly opened fire with his fully automatic pistol, severely wounding Christina and Newman and killing Broom, who was hit 3 times in the neck. Jesus. Okay. I'll take my statement about that pistol being automatic as a bad idea. Nelson was later quoted as having said that Broom and had him cold and could not understand why he had not fired. It was found that the safety catch on Brune's gun was on. Well, that's gotta suck. Nelson stole the FBI car less than 15 miles away. The car suffered a flat tire and finally became mirrored in mud as Nelson attempted to unsuccessfully to change it. Back on foot, he wandered into the woods and took residence in Chippewa family in their secluded cabin for several days before making his final escape and another commandeered vehicle. He stole another vehicle. Three of the women who had accompanied the gang, including Nelson's wife Helen, were captured inside the lodge after grueling interrogation by the FBI. The three were ultimately convicted of harboring charges and released on parole. With an agent, went too far. With an agent and an innocent bystander dead and four more severely wounded, including two more innocent bystanders, as well as the complete escape of the Dillinger gang, the FBI came under severe criticism, who with calls from Director J. Hoover, resignation, and a wide circulated petition demanding Purvis suspension.
Now, at the time of the Little Bohemia shootout, Nelson's identity as a member of the Dillinger gang had been known only to the FBI for 2 weeks. Now, following the killing of Baum, Nelson became nationally notorious and was made a high priority target of the Bureau. The focus on him and the murdered agent served to deflect some of the intense criticisms directed at Hoover and Purvis following the Little Bohemia debacle. Now, a day after the Little Bohemia raid, Dillinger, Hamilton, Van Meter ran through a police roadblock near Hastings, Minnesota, drawing fire from officers there. Now, ricocheting bullets struck Hamilton in the back, fatally wounding him. Hamilton reportedly died in hiding on April 30th or May 1st of 1934 and was secretly buried by Dillinger and others, including Nelson, who had rejoined the gang in Aurora, Illinois. Now, on June 7th, the gang member Tommy Carroll was killed while trying to evade arrest in Waterloo, Iowa. Carroll and his girlfriend, Jean Compton, who had been captured and tried with Helen Gillis after Little Bohemia, had grown close to the Nelsons, and his death was a personal blow to them. Nelson and his wife went into hiding during the ensuing weeks, and although they were in the Chicago area, their precise movements in this period remained obscure. The Nelsons reportedly lived in various tourist camps while continuing to secretly meet with family members whenever possible. Now, on June 27th, former gang errand runner and Little Bohemia fugitive Pat Riley was arrested in St. Paul, Minnesota. Now, on the morning of June 30th, Nelson, Dillinger, Van Meter, and one or more additional accomplices robbed the Merchants National Bank in South Bend, Indiana. One man involved in the robbery is believed to have been Pretty Boy Floyd, based on several eyewitness identifications, as well as the latter account of Joseph Fatso McGarry, and an old Nelson associate from California who was serving as a gopher for the gang at the time. Another rumored participant was Nelson's childhood friend Jack Perkins, also associated with the gang at the time. Now, Perkins was later tried for the robbery and acquitted. Now, when the robbery began, policeman Howard Wagner had been directing traffic outside, responding quickly to the scene and attempting to draw his gun. He was shot dead by Van Meter, who was stationed outside the bank. During the shootout that followed, Nelson exchanged fire with a local jeweler, Harry Berg, who had shot him in the chest, ineffectively because of Nelson's bulletproof vest. As Berg retreated into his store under a return volley from Nelson, a man in a parked car was wounded. Nelson was also grappled briefly with a teenage boy, Joseph Pawlowski, who tackled him until Nelson or Van Meter stunned Pawlowski with a blow from his gun. When Dillinger and the man identified as Floyd, unconfirmed, emerged from the bank with sacks containing $28,000, They brought 3 hostages with them, including the bank president, to deter gunfire from the 3 patrolmen on the scene. The policeman fired nonetheless, wounding 2 of the hostages before grazing Van Meter in the head. The gang escaped and Van Meter recovered. In the constant and chaotic exchange of gunfire, several other bystanders were wounded by shots, ricochets, or by flying broken glass. It was the last confirmed robbery for all of the known and suspected participants, including Floyd. During the month of July, as the FBI manhunt for him continued, Nelson and his wife fled to California with associate John Paul Chase, who remained with Nelson for the rest of his life. Upon their return to Chicago on July 15th, the gang held a reunion meeting at a favorite rendezvous site. When the meeting was interrupted by 2 Illinois state troopers, Fred McAllister and Gilbert Cross, Nelson fired on their vehicle with his converted machine gun pistol, wounding both men as the gangsters retreated. Cross was badly wounded, but he and McAllister survived. Nelson's responsibility was uncertain until verification came later in the form of a confession from Chase. On July 22nd, 1934, Dillinger was ambushed and killed by FBI agents outside the Biograph Theater in Lincoln Park, Chicago. The next day, the FBI announced that Pretty Boy Floyd was now public enemy number 1. On October 22nd, 1934, Floyd was killed in a shootout with agents including Melvin Purvis. Subsequently, J. Edgar Hoover announced that Nelson was now public enemy number 1. And on August 23rd, Van Meter was ambushed and killed by police in St. Paul, Minnesota, leaving Nelson as the sole survivor of the so-called Second Dillinger Gang. In the ensuing months, Nelson and his wife, usually accompanied by Chase, drifted west to cities including Sacramento and San Francisco, and Reno, and Las Vegas, Nevada. They often stayed in auto camps, including Wally's Hot Springs, outside Genoa, Nevada, where they hid out from October 1st and before returning to Chicago around November 1st. Nelson's movements during the final month of his life are largely unknown. By the end of the month, FBI interest had settled on a former hideout of Nelson's, the Lake Como Inn in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, where it was believed that Nelson might return for the winter. When the Nelsons and Chase did return to the inn on November 27th, they briefly came face to face with surprised and unprepared FBI agents who had staked it out. The fugitives sped away before any shots were fired. Armed with a description of the car, a black Ford V8, and its license plate number 639578, agents swarmed into the area. A short but furious gun battle between FBI agents and Nelson took place on November 27th of 1934, outside Chicago in the town of Barrington, culminating in the deaths of Nelson and FBI agents Herman Ed Hollis and Samuel P. Cowley. On the morning of November 27th, Nelson, along with his wife Helen Gillis and associate John Paul Chase, headed south in a stolen V8 towards Chicago on Highway 12, which is now US 14. Nelson, always keen to spot federal agents, caught sight of a sedan driven in the opposite direction by agents Thomas McDade and William Ryan. Both parties simultaneously recognized each other after several U-turns by both vehicles. Nelson wound up in the pursuit of the agent's car. When Nelson's powerful Ford caught up with the agent's slower sedan, Chase opened fire on the agents. Ryan and McDade returned fire, sped up, and then pulled into a field and awaited Nelson and Chase, who had stopped pursuing. McDade and Ryan were unaware that one of their bullets had punctured the water pump of Nelson's Ford. With Nelson's Ford rapidly losing power, a Hudson automobile driven by Hollis, who had been given credit as one of the agents who fired the fatal shots that killed Dillinger the previous July, and Cowley began pursuing the Ford. With his pursuers attempting to pull alongside, Nelson skidded into the entrance of Barrington's Northside Park. Hollis and Cowley overshot Nelson's car by over 100 feet and stopped at an angle. Upon exiting the vehicle's passenger door, the agents took cover behind their car. The ensuing shootout was witnessed by more than a dozen people. Nelson yelled to Helen to take cover in a nearby ditch that he and Chase opened fire on the net, and then he and Chase opened fire. Both Callie and Hollis returned fire from behind their vehicle. A single 45 slug from Callie's machine gun struck Nelson in the lower abdomen. Nelson leaned on the Ford's running board, then wordlessly exchanged weapons with Chase. In the din of the gun battle, Chase heard Nelson complain that his weapon was jamming, and the wounded Nelson swapped it out for either a .351 Winchester or a Colt Monitor machine rifle. Despite his grievous wound, Nelson moved from behind the car and advanced toward the agents while firing his weapon. 2 bullets struck Callie. Several buckshot pellets from Hollis's shotgun then struck Nelson in the legs and knocked him down. As Nelson regained his feet, Hollis, possibly already wounded, moved to better cover behind a utility pole. As he drew his service pistol, Nelson fatally shot Hollis in the head. Nelson staggered over Hollis's body, aimed his weapon at the agent's fallen form, and for a moment then limped toward the agent's Hudson, their car, the Hudson. Nelson drove the car over to the disabled Ford. After loading the agent's car with the Ford's guns and supplies, Nelson let Chase get behind the wheel of the agent's car, and the 2 men and Helen Gillis fled the scene. Nelson was shot a total of 9 times. A single and ultimately fatal machine gun slug had struck his abdomen, and 8 of Hollis's shotgun pellets had hit his legs. Later news reports inaccurately gave his number of wounds as 17, possibly due to a memorandum released by J. Edgar Hoover stating that 7 to 10 wounds to Nelson's body. After telling his wife, "I'm done for," Nelson gave directions as Chase drove them to a safe house on Walnut Street in Wilmette. Nelson died in bed with his wife at his side at 7:35 p.m. Hollis was pronounced dead soon after arriving at the hospital. At a different hospital, Cowley lived for long enough to confer briefly with Melvin Purvis and have surgery before succumbing to a stomach wound similar to Nelson's. Following a telephone tip from a Chicago telephone company employee, Carl Feary, who was working on the telephone lines and saw a body on the ground, Nelson's body was discovered wrapped in an Indian pattern blanket by FBI agent Walter Walsh in a ditch on the north side corner of the St. Paul's Lutheran Cemetery in Skokie, and taken to Haben's funeral home, both of which still exist. Helen later stated that she had placed the blanket around Nelson's body because he always hated being cold. I cannot talk today. Newspapers reported, based on the aggressive wording of the order from J. Edgar Hoover, "Find the woman and give her no quarter," that the FBI had issued a death order for Nelson's widow, who wandered the streets of Chicago as a fugitive for several days, described in print as the U.S.'s first female public enemy. After surrendering on Thanksgiving Day, Helen, who had been paroled after capture at Little Bohemia, served a year in prison for harboring her husband. Chase was apprehended later and served a term at Alcatraz. Babyface Nelson and his wife Helen are buried at St. Joseph's Cemetery in River Grove, Illinois.
Now, several things on this that got me curious. I mean, their first heist, they pretty much broke the bank. It's one of those things. If you look at how much they made off that first heist, which was roughly what, $2 million,
Mm-hmm.
$3 million. That's right, $3 million. Just calculating how many people were in their gang and everything. I wondered. It was like after the first one, I would have stopped if I was a criminal like that. But
Yeah, it's interesting to note that Nelson, his headstone
mm-hmm.
says Lester Gillis on it.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it because that's his name, but I don't know. I think that they went with the birth name as opposed to the notorious name, maybe in an attempt to kind of ward off tourism.
Yeah, I guess so. But if you know
It'd be
now, you
interesting
know
though,
exactly where it's at.
just to take a road trip
Yeah.
to see where some of these different gangsters are buried.
Did they bury Bonnie and Clyde? I went over. I went over.
I do. I want to say they did because remember, um, Bonnie's family, or at least her sister, was petitioning to have her body exhumed and buried with Clyde.
Yeah, Clyde was. Clyde Burrows is an turret in his family plot at the Western Heights Cemetery with his brother Marvin Buck Burrows, who was killed in a shootout with police in Placid City, Missouri. So I guess he's in Missouri. Bonnie was buried in Northwest Dallas. You know, it's a funny thing. My brother-in-law finally told me is because me and him were talking about the Bonnie and Clyde episode. And well, I was actually talking about the one that Alan Alan, the guy from Cleared Hot. I can't remember his name right now.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking with I was talking to him about that one because in that case, the woman supposedly initiated the murders. And he's like, yeah. And that's what got me onto doing Bonnie and Clyde. And I was saying, it's like, from what there was a lot of information that Bonnie initiated the killings and everything and the robbery. And from what he said, his grandmother was friends. Well, they went to the same school. Bonnie was a bitch. Clyde was like very, very constricted and shy and everything, but Bonnie was a bitch, from what she said. I was like, I can believe that. I can full holler believe that. But it's so strange of criminals back then, of how long it took to get them, and surprisingly how much the information got out. I mean, the first radio is probably the criminal's worst stepping stone of getting caught really fast. Because look at like like before the radio, it was so hard to get information back and forth, even with the telephone.
Oh yeah. You know, I mean, of course, nowadays you got cell phones, you got social media, you got the 24-hour news cycle. I mean, man.
Well, it takes the max I've seen so far was probably about 3 days to find somebody.
Yeah, if that.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of lore that goes around, or legend that goes around with Babyface Nelson or Lester Gillis.
It's more or less the John Dillinger gang, or the John Dillinger was the main. I mean, they made a movie, and the lead person of that movie was Johnny Depp of Public Enemy.
But even they got that one wrong.
Yeah,
because they had the gang dying at the Bohemia shootout.
Well, you know, Hollywood.
You know, but I mean, I think that the romanticization of high-profile criminals really kind of waned itself after the whole Bonnie and Clyde incident.
Yeah, because even that movie from the 1960s, Bonnie and Clyde, the Highwayman is 100 times better because Frank Hames was a badass.
Yeah.
In the Bonnie and Clyde movie, the guy that played Frank Hames, even though, you know, he's a good actor, but you can only do what's written on you. But Frank Hames in that was, oh my God, Even
Oh
though
yeah, absolutely.
because it was the guy from Uncle Jesse from Dukes of Hazzard.
Yeah.
But in all reality, Frank Haynes was just I wouldn't want to cross him. He was like the main man back then. If you cross paths with Frank Haynes, you fucked up.
Yeah.
But what was it? BC was telling me about because he read the Frank Haynes story, and that's what we were talking about.
Right.
And he was a just man and a lot of people don't know that. It's just so sad that if you want to have like an interesting story and everything, you have to villainize the cops sometimes, as
You do.
bump.
Now, I mean, comparatively speaking, um, like after the Boston Marathon bombing,
Hmm.
you started seeing the surviving bomber. He's, I mean, he has girls swooning over him.
I don't get that.
And I'm just
I
like,
mean, I get it, but I mean,
well, I mean, I get it too because it's a reflection of the public education system.
yeah.
But I'm just like, good God, I mean, it's insane.
You can't fix that shit.
You can't, but you can duct tape the hell out of
Mm-hmm.
it.
Did they have that? That was one thing I was trying to ask. Did they have duct tape in the
I'm sure they did.
1930s? How was duct tape invented? I'm just curious now.
I don't know. It's worth a Google.
Yeah. Duct tape invented. Duct tape was invented in huh. So it was just an adhesive tape. It wasn't duct tape. Because duct tape wasn't invented until 1943.
Okay.
That's weird. Guess it's just regular tape. Adhesive tape, as they said in the article. But of this one, I want to get into the Dillinger next week. Then I think we
We
should.
just kind of want to go with this theme for a little bit, see how far we can ride it.
Well, my brother, I always loved gangster movies, and I loves like Casino and
Mhm.
like The Irishman. Even though it was very very slow, it was slow. Of course, it was also 3 hours. But
Dude, it was painfully slow.
yes.
I mean,
You could have cut that. I'm sorry. You could have cut a lot of that stuff out, but I don't know. I understand. Good.
that was nothing more than the director cashing in one last time on the aging cash cows that are Al Pacino and Robert De Niro, and I think Joe Pesci was in that movie too.
Yeah, Joe Pesci was in it, but he was very, very. He actually, if you go with Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro, not Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, they switched roles in this one
Yeah.
because Al Pacino was the hothead, which Joe Pesci's always played the hothead.
Yeah.
But he
Yeah.
he still has the chops. It's too bad he retired. It took several times to get Joe Pesci to play that role. They had to like rein in.
Well, when he figured he was getting typecast, it was time to hang it up because he wasn't going to get any other kind of roles.
I would have put him in. He's done comedy. He's really good at comedy. What was that
Oh
one?
yeah, but he still played a hothead. I mean, look at his role in the Lethal Weapon movies.
He wasn't a hothead. He was just bumbling.
Yeah, but he was always losing his temper.
He wasn't losing his temper. He was just
Yeah, he
very.
was. Well, okay, so he's like, look at this little phone. They
Okay.
fuck you.
Okay, he did that.
And
Yeah.
then the phones keep getting smaller, and then they do when you lose them, they fuck you, and they keep fucking you. And I mean, it was that whole
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
point is that he wasn't going to get any other type of role, and I mean, he didn't have the star power, he didn't have the pull, he didn't have, the let's just say that he didn't have the dirt that, like, say, somebody like Jim Carrey had on the producers, to where he could afford to be given roles like the Truman Show, you know.
Yeah. I still like he was very calm in I mean, he still played a gangster, but he was very calm in eight heads in a duffel bag.
But again, typecast as a gangster.
Gangster, yeah.
So,
I could, you know what? I could still see Joe Pesci as a mentor role.
I could, but I would love to see. Yeah, I would love to see Joe Pesci come back and do like kind of like a father, fatherly type role.
Yeah, calm
where
father type role.
yeah, I mean, I think he could pull it off. I mean,
Well, now it'd be like grandfather role, but
whatever,
yeah.
but I think that he could pull it off, and I mean, I don't know. Anyways, I don't know. What do you think? We land this plane this week?
Yeah. I mean, this is interesting. I like I said, I really like gangster stuff, and we really it's like we covered the Valentine Day massacre, but we never really covered Al Capone either. We can go out through the gangsters and everything. But anyways, everybody, again, I'm David Dickerman.
I'm Johnny Skelton, stuffing my face with Cheetos and milk.
This is Psychos and Sociopaths. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching. Dunka. Cheerio.
Stay classy, San Diego, and go fuck yourself.
Yes.